Good morning, everyone. As Anne referenced, my name is Alicia Reinhard. I'm the Transition and Graduation Consultant on the Special Education team. I also have the privilege of being the Transition Improvement Grant Director. I'm really excited to join you all this morning. Anne and the TIG staff have been sharing with me some of the work and connections that you've been making through the Career and Life Readiness course. So I'm excited that we get to kind of talk about some of that work and reflections today, and hopefully come up with some more connections as you kind of move into the latter part of your fall. We're getting through first quarter and things like that. So this morning, I'm just going to start with a really brief presentation referencing why career and technical education engagement, or CTE engagement, is so important for our students with disabilities and the evidence around that. So we're going to begin about talking about the predictors of post-school success from NTACT-C. NTACT-C is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative. They're a federally funded technical assistance center by the Office of Special Education at the federal level, and then they also are jointly funded with the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, and that's the federal organization that oversees DVR. And the one thing that I really rely heavily on in my role, and that we support you all in, that NTACT provides for us, is they regularly review bodies of research and evidence from the field across the country about what are the most impactful things that we can do to help our students with IEPs be successful when they leave high school. That is created into what a body of resources that they call the predictors of post-school success. On the screen here, I've just taken a snip of one of their one-pager documents that talks about what those predictors are and sort of their impact area. The slides are linked in the agenda today. I do have the predictors linked if you click this image to see more information. But essentially what they have done is they regularly look at this research. I think most recently they were updated in 2020, and they're looking for what are the experiences, effective practices, and transition services, etc., that students with IEPs can go through that will help them be successful when they leave high school. And they look specifically at those three areas of post-secondary transition planning that we set goals around: education, employment, and independent living. And of this list of predictors, they rate the impact of those predictors in each of those areas. And so when I'm using these with the field and in professional development, I like to kind of hone in on what I call sort of the high impact predictors. And those are the things that hit all three of those areas that really help our students be holistically ready for their life after high school. And so those include goal setting, inclusion in general education, paid employment and work experience, psychological empowerment, self-determination, student support, and youth autonomy. But the one thing I also wanted to point out is that you can see here on the screen, career and technical education, which they previously called vocational education, is the only predictor that is considered evidence-based at this point. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So when looking at this research and body of evidence, NTACT rates these predictors as evidence-based, research-based, and promising practices. And so CTE is currently the only evidence-based, kind of the highest tier of research and evidence that we have around impacting outcomes for students with IEPs. And so that means that not only do we have evidence that it improves outcomes for students with IEPs, but there's also research that adheres to rigorous and quality design around implementing those practices. So not only do we've researched and know that it works, but it's been implemented and we're able to replicate those results. Bottom line, it means if we can do career and technical education well, if we can implement it to fidelity, we can expect all students to experience growth, including especially students with disabilities. Excuse me. So the other thing that I really love about this about some of this predictors and resources that NTACT has produced around these predictors is not only do they tell us what those predictors are, they really describe those practices as when I'm in my classroom and I'm in my school building and community, this is what it looks like. And so some of the research that they've reviewed around career and technical education looks things like a sequence of entry-level and advanced academic courses, accommodations in those CTE courses to ensure content mastery, hands-on learning experience in the classroom and community, career counseling, career instruction, career development activities like job shadows, internships, apprenticeships, etc. And the one thing I wanted to point out, this is just a few tenets of what effective career and technical education practices look like for students with IEPs, but they probably sound pretty familiar to some of those high impact post-school predictors that I had mentioned, like inclusion in general education, paid employment and work experience, and goal setting. So NTAC tells us on a national level and from the research base that CTE engagement is an evidence-based predictor, but what does that mean for students in Wisconsin? Are we seeing sort of the same evidence? And so we're going to spend a few minutes looking at some specific data points for Wisconsin students and Wisconsin students with IEPs to see if that evidence is present for us as well. So you're looking at the 5-year graduation rate trends for students with and without disabilities. Students without disabilities are the blue line. Students with disabilities are the green line. The yellow line is students who are unknown. So that's usually just a very small number of students who are missing that demographic of whether or not they are a student with or without a disability. I'm happy to note that after many years of a very stable graduation rate for students with IEP or students with disabilities, we're seeing a little bit of growth, but you can see that there continues to be that gap between students with and without disabilities. And that gap is present for students who graduate in 4 years or 5, 6, etc. So next, specifically, I pulled some of these data points from the 2023 Annual Career and Technical Education Report, or the CTE report from our CTE team here at DPI. And this specifically is looking at the graduation rates for a CTE concentrator. And that means a student who has taken 2 or more CTE courses in the same career pathway. Nationally, the graduation rate for this group of students is 95%. And you can see here specifically for Wisconsin, we see significant differences in graduation rates for students who are CTE concentrators versus not. And then that gray line across the bars shows that state graduation rate that we just looked at a minute. So students who are participating in 2 or more CTE courses in career pathways are experiencing much higher graduation rates. So then when we talk about how are students with disabilities participating in this coursework, we are seeing even bigger gaps than we saw in graduation rates. So we're looking at the 2021-22 participant by the numbers. And so this is just students who took any CTE course, not necessarily a concentrator yet. And you can see a huge difference there for students with disabilities or without. And then specifically looking at the 5-year trends, are we seeing all students generally participate more in career and technical education? And the data tells us that yes, we are seeing a much greater number of all students participate in CTE, but that growth looks much smaller for students with disabilities. We've seen a pretty significant jump, which is great. That tells me that more students with disabilities are learning about the opportunities in CTE coursework, are learning about career pathways, but there is still, again, that huge gap that we noted on the last slide. And then specifically, when we talk about CTE concentrators in Wisconsin, we're seeing significant differences for the percentage of students who are participating as a concentrator versus just taking one CTE course. Students with disabilities are about 11% of concentrators, and so when we know that there's that significant gap for graduation rates for students with disabilities, but then also the impact that being a CTE concentrator has on graduation rates. This is something that we really want to work towards, higher levels of engagement. And it doesn't just stop for students with disabilities. I think the thing I wanted to point out on this slide as well is that our students who might experience intersectionality, who may have economic disadvantages, maybe English learners or students of color, are also experiencing gaps in participation rates in career and technical education. And so, how the numbers tell us it's important. The numbers tell they make a case for getting students engaged and deepening that engagement for students with disabilities. But how do we impact that? What's the first step? And so a good start is building a network with strong connections. And so I've taken this graphic of a network around a CTE program in a school district or a community. And I'd want you to just take a moment and reflect on this and think about sort of how does this network look for you in your day-to-day work? The other thing I know from my time in the field and that we hear from especially special educators right now is a lot of times special education departments or transition staff have networks that look like this. But do they look the same for the CTE experts in your district, or are those things separate? And so that's really what we want to kind of talk about in the first part of our networking today is sort of what do your networks look like? Are they separate? Are they interconnected? And so that we can keep building the engagement and opportunity for CTE programming for students with disabilities. So I'm not quite sure where we're at with time. I think I have maybe a few minutes if there were any questions, and then we're going to move into our first breakout room for you all to connect with each other. Anne, is there any questions for me to answer?
I don't see any questions that came in the chat. We do have a couple of minutes, as Alicia said. If you have questions for Alicia, now would be a great time to either come off mute and ask your question or place your question in the chat. Alicia had some really good information, a lot of really strong data that show the importance of connecting students with disabilities to CTE courses and opportunities. And Jenny put some resources in the chat as Alicia was speaking, including the CTE annual report. You might want to take a peek at that, and it might be helpful to look at that data and compare it with your district or community.
I guess I do have a question.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, when we talk about, when you said a CTE concentrator is a person who takes 2 classes, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. So is it that they have to be 2 classes and like be very successful in those 2 classes that there's the growth? Because I have a hard time, like I agree that we do always have a lower number for success with students with disabilities, but I have a hard time believing that schools don't within 4 years at least have a student in a CTE class at least twice.
I think it has to do with the pathway. So they need to take a sequence of at least 2 courses within the same pathway. And so that's part of it. But I do think, from what my data partners are telling me on the CTE team is we're just really seeing low engagement from what's reported. This is reported by school districts to DPI, of students being in that concentrator category for students with disabilities. So
Really interesting. I just wonder what they do. I mean, like,
yeah,
you don't take electives. What are you doing?
It's an interesting data point. Sometimes I wonder too, and that's something that we want to investigate more at DPI. That's a newer data point that we're tracking. Is, are students with disabilities taking electives that are they in some of those courses, but are they renamed? Are they taking something that's maybe taught by a special education teacher, and so the course has a different name? There's a lot of, I think, variables there.
Okay.
But yeah.
I just wanted to clarify if if it had to be like CT concentrator, like successfully towards, okay.
Yeah, and I might
be
missing a detail there, but as far as I know, it's just 2 courses. Go ahead, Marcy.
For a little clarification, because this is the world I live in with the career pathways stuff. It has to be 2 courses within a pathway. So an introductory culinary arts and then an advanced culinary arts. And it has to be taught by a licensed CTE teacher. So you were spot on. If it was a class that was not taught by a licensed CTE teacher, it doesn't count from a DPI recording of that. So in some of our small districts, we have teachers teaching courses. For example, I used to teach parent and child because I had a psychology degree. But I wasn't a CTE teacher, so that wouldn't count as a sequence of courses for their CTE concentrators. So there are some nuances in how that data is recorded.
Thank you, Marcy. That was really helpful point to make.
I was just going to comment too, in our district, I know we've talked about like how a lot of our special education students also are like dabblers in CTE. So they might take the first course in many different areas. So they take welding 1 and then they're like, oh, I don't really like welding. So then they move on and they take culinary 1 and then they move on and they like just sample all the CTE, but they don't really necessarily dive in deeper to one of those courses. So that's something that we found in our district.
Thank you for sharing, Steph. That would be a really interesting action step as a result of this professional development, is maybe seeing how you all could implement support for getting students into a second course that they're interested in. I love the discovery of that, but definitely helping students kind of further that path.
There is a question that came in the chat. Mari asked if there's a CTE class taught by a substitute, does it count? And Marcy, I wonder if you wouldn't mind speaking to that.
It would not. And again, it depends on if it's a long-term sub or a short-term sub, because they have to have that CTE license. So if the teacher on record had the CTE license, so like if you were covering a maternity leave, yes. If it was for the year and you didn't have a CTE teacher on record, that would be no.